British citizen were kidnapped in Turkey late Friday. Turkish authorities say the Westerners were on a mission in search of Noah's Ark when they were abducted by a band of Turkish separatists near Karlovia. The group was working on a television special. The TV company's owner told CNN the rebels are known to take hostages to embarrass their government.
Well, we had planned to go to a town down in southeast Turkey, and we had planned to get there before dark. I've been out there about 32 times, and you do not travel after dark. There's road repairs, and we ended up getting caught in this roadblock by these terrorists.
Okay, so Kurdish rebels took you. Did they tell you why they took you, and you were taken for about 3 weeks?
Well, basically, they said nobody listened to them unless they had hostages. So that was their expressed reason for doing it. And we had gone to Turkey in late August to talk to the appropriate authorities about getting a permit to excavate Noah's Ark. And we were hopeful of being able to do a little preliminary work this fall, and then, of course, be able to do the excavation next summer. As it turned out, we were successful in getting our permit, and on a Thursday afternoon we were promised that the permit would be ready for us Monday. This, of course, gave us 3 days to wait somewhere. Now, we decided that we would like to go down into the southeastern portion of Turkey and look at 2 mountains that were called Nimrut Dağ, or Mountains of Nimrod. We had flown out to Erzurum, got our taxi driver, Dilavar. Since there were 4 of us, we decided to get a minibus instead of a taxi, as that would be too crowded, and there's not that great a difference in the price of having a minibus or a taxi. So we rounded up the minibus and a driver and headed off down towards Bengal in plenty of time to get through that area that was a known terrorist-controlled area before nightfall. The road was torn up, and we were delayed enough so that we were about 8 miles outside of Bengal when the car, there was 4 vehicles in front of us, suddenly turned broadside of the road and blocked the road, and all of us had to come to a stop. And out of the woods on both sides of the road came these people with AK-47s and other automatic weapons, hand grenades, and shall we say, it didn't take long for them to sort through the people on the regularly scheduled bus that was just in front of us. They found a British tourist in there. They brought him out, and of course they got the 4 of us, and off through the woods we went. And this area is called the Black Hell. It's very, very rough terrain, and on our way out, after we had gotten away from these terrorists and were being flown out by helicopter, we were able to video some of this to give you an idea of the type of terrain that we had to travel through every night for approximately 21 nights. We had to sleep on the ground during the day, and it did get quite cold before the 21 days ended. It was not a comfortable trip by any stretch of the imagination.
Good evening. American and Turkish authorities are trying to find 5 Westerners tonight who were kidnapped earlier today by Kurdish rebels. One of the men is a Nashville amateur archaeologist. Ron Wyatt was in Turkey with a group which is trying to prove the existence of Noah's Ark. There's been no word on how the search is going, but Wyatt's wife is confident they will be released. Ron Wyatt is an anesthesiology nurse by profession, but his main focus in life, according to his wife, is archaeology, specifically proving that Noah's Ark exists.
In 1959, he saw a picture of a boat-shaped object in Life magazine and was more than deeply impressed that that was the remains of Noah's Ark, and he went out there in '77 and has gone out there many times every year since then, and you know, has proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that it is Noah's Ark.
Wyatt was in Turkey with 5 other Westerners when they were kidnapped early this morning by Kurdish guerrillas. Kurdish Workers' Party is the group suspected in the kidnapping. The guerrillas kidnapped 10 German tourists from the same area earlier this month. They were released a week later. Wyatt's business partner, Doug Snyder, says on this trip, Wyatt was trying to, quote, arrange a preliminary excavation on the site that we believe is in fact Noah's Ark, in preparation for a primetime television special now in production. Wyatt's wife says the information that will be in that special will change people's lives.
But when they have something tangible to look at and see and scientific evidence, then it gives them a reason for the faith.
Mary Nell Wyatt acknowledges that spending so much time in Turkey is risky. Ron Wyatt has made 30 trips there since 1977. But she's confident her husband will be released.
I expect them to be released and go about their work. They're over there for a purpose. And
the State Department says it's monitoring the kidnapping in Washington and at the U.S. Embassy in Ankara. The rebels that took Wyatt want a separate Kurdish state in what is now eastern Turkey.
We left the bus. I took some money from my wallet and put it where I could get it easily without being noticed, and with the intent of dropping this at intervals along the way that we were being taken, so that a search group would be able to find at least the direction we left from. Also, I didn't know exactly what these people had in mind. I had heard about 10 German tourists being taken about 3 weeks before that, and they had been released in about a week to 10 days unharmed. But I wasn't sure whether this was the same group and whether their intentions were just to hold us to get attention, or whether they had something else in mind. So as we left the bus, we went down a very steep embankment. Then we began to climb a hill or a mountain that was very, very steep, and it was very difficult climbing. And when we got to the top, I decided that if we were going to be killed anyway, that then would be better than after we had been drug all through these mountains for whatever period of time they had in mind. So I was quite out of breath. That much was not pretense, but I pretended to have a heart attack and collapsed to the ground. And in my anesthesia work, one of the most unnerving things that can happen is a convulsion. If it's epileptic, you know what to do for it. If it's not, shall we say, we still know what to do, but it's a rather unnerving experience. So I faked some seizures. My idea and intent was that if these people were intending to kill us, that they would probably just simply blow me away and take the other people and go on. They didn't do this. They, shall we say, expressed quite a bit of concern, and they had been telling us up to this point in Turkish and broken English that they were our friends, that they would not hurt us. But of course that's what everyone tells hostages. This is to get them to cooperate. So anyway, once I decided they weren't going to kill us, and I had successfully dropped some money along the route to lead somebody in after us, I decided that it might be wise to go ahead and go on with the people. It's possible that they would have left me behind if I had just continued my sinking spell there. But anyway, they gave me 2 terrorists, one under each arm, and off we went through the mountains. And later on, when some of the fellows were complaining about how difficult the trip was, I teased them a bit and said they were just lucky they didn't have to carry 2 terrorists around like I did. Anyway, I wasn't carrying them. They were helpful in getting over the rough terrain. They had much better vision than I have, and shall we say, they kept me from falling over rocks and that sort of thing in the dark, and saved me from getting a lot more banged up than I did as it was. Now, basically, every night we traveled, and the amount of distance that we covered had something to do with the closeness of those that were looking for us. And then during the daytime, we were forced to lay on the ground under the bushes. Now, early on in this experience, there were helicopters that began to look for us, and news over the Sony shortwave radios that the terrorists had, that the American embassy, the British embassy, and the Australian embassy had moved certain people to Bengal, and that they were going to stay there until we were found. These embassies setting up offices in the local city was kind of a surprise to the terrorists, but they were delighted to get all the attention that they were getting. And when possible, when the newscasts came on about them and their captives, they, shall we say, danced and sang and had a real good time. Needless to say, we didn't join in those festivities.
A Madison woman is waiting for news of her husband's whereabouts after he was kidnapped on Friday, apparently by Kurdish rebels. Ron Wyatt was in eastern Turkey working on a documentary. The amateur archaeologist was traveling near Bengal on his way to Mount Ararat, near the Iranian border, where he believes he's found the ruins of Noah's Ark. As Channel 2's Stuart Watson reports, Wyatt's wife expresses a quiet confidence her husband will be all right.
I was frantic when I first heard that, he'd been kidnapped.
But Mary Nell Wyatt is frantic no more. She's concerned about her husband, amateur archaeologist Ron Wyatt, but she recognizes it would not be in the best interest of Kurdish rebels to harm him.
That would be the worst thing they could do. So they're just trying to harass the Turkish government.
Ron Wyatt works as an anesthetist at Nashville Memorial Hospital, but for almost 40 years he's been virtually obsessed by Noah's Ark.
I believe that God has preserved time capsules in different parts of the world, mostly in the Far East or Middle East there, and that these are to get the attention of people.
It was on a trip to eastern Turkey, similar to this one, recorded by Ron's production company, that he was kidnapped. Rebels reportedly commandeered his minibus, captured Ron and 4 other Westerners, but released his driver. It won't be the first time Ron has faced danger while visiting the ruins he believes to be Noah's Ark. Ron and his sons have been captured and imprisoned in Saudi Arabia while mistaken for Israeli spies. They've been chased by local Kurdish bandits out to rob them.
They had pipes, they were beaten with pipes, and they had swords, those like scimitars.
This time, on a mission to document ancient ruins, Ron Wyatt appears to be a captive in a modern political battle, while his wife, Mary Nell, accepts phone calls and prayers, wishing her husband well. Stuart Watson, Channel 2 News at 6.
On the 4th day of our captivity, the Turkish military cornered the terrorist group that held us, and before they closed all the way in, the commander of the group, who was called Abraham, explained to us, those of us that weren't asleep, that the police on one side of our encampment were no problem, and he mentioned that he paid them lira. He just simply said lira, 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 no problem. And but he pointed in the other direction to the other side and said, police, big problem. And so anyway, a little later that afternoon, we noticed some people on the tops of ridges, roughly a mile from our position, and down in the valley just below us. A military officer yelled to the terrorist leader and demanded that they surrender and that they release as hostages our tourists, as they referred to us. The terrorist leader yelled back for them to go away or they would kill the tourist immediately. Now, we were sitting on the ground at this point in time, and 3 of the terrorists got up and took positions to our just in front of us, basically. One to the left, one to the right, and one right in front of us. They flipped their automatic weapons to automatic, and one of the men, the one standing right in front of us, had tears running down his face. Now this convinced me that he believed that the end had arrived. Of course, I'm sure they expected that the military would kill all of them, and of course they were going to kill us first. So I said a little prayer, another one of many, and a text came to mind, and that is, "Be thou faithful unto death, and I will give thee a crown of life." Now, that wasn't the text I was hoping would come to mind in that particular situation. However, reflecting on that, had we been killed there, our lives were in order, or at least mine was, as much as, humanly possible. And there was no reason to believe that I would not have been resurrected in the first resurrection. Also, I was aware that God was quite able to take care of my family and quite able to get the work done without me. And so I really felt a bit of relief at that point in time. If you're doing this work, as important as it is, one must be so careful not to get yourself into it too much, and to make sure that you know God's will at every step of the way. There's a bit of stress involved in that, and the thought that God could go ahead and finish it and I could just, shall we say, wake up in the first resurrection was not that unpleasant a thought at that point in time. Anyway, the military officer shouted back that they would go away, but that they would encircle this black hell region so that the terrorists could not take us anywhere out of there. And this was a good thing they did that, because the terrorists were constantly talking, saying that the best thing for them to do was to take us to Iraq. Now, had they managed to get us to Iraq, our futures would certainly have been in jeopardy, because there, as far as I know, there would have been no way that anybody could have helped us. And these people were very, very pleased at the attention they were getting from us.
Good evening. Half a world away, events are unfolding tonight that may lead to the release of a Nashville man believed held hostage in eastern Turkey. Amateur archaeologist Ron Wyatt is one of 5 Westerners reportedly kidnapped a week ago while searching for remains of Noah's Ark. Tom Lee has the latest.
If he was in Lebanon, it would disturb me greatly, but it wasn't.
To listen to Mary Nell Wyatt, one might think her husband Ron is just late coming home from work. Hers hardly seems the voice of someone whose spouse disappeared a week ago, reportedly the captive of violent rebels thousands of miles away.
Ron takes only calculated risks. He weighs everything before he does something.
Wyatt's confident tone belies her faith. Faith in her religion and faith that her husband is about to be free. Ron Wyatt is a nurse in Nashville, but he's dedicated his life to proving that this formation in the mountains of eastern Turkey is in fact the remains of Noah's Ark. 8 days ago, the U.S. State Department said members of the Kurdish Workers' Party, or PKK, kidnapped Wyatt and 4 others on a tour through eastern Turkey. The PKK is a rebel group fighting for an independent Kurdish state in eastern Turkey and northern Iraq.
You know, they're living under other governments, and they're just trying to strong-arm their way somehow to exert their dominance.
Today, the Associated Press reported that Wyatt and his colleagues would be freed tomorrow. The AP says PKK leaders made that claim in a message to a Turkish newspaper. But that report conflicts with a French wire service story today. It quotes a PKK leader denying any involvement in a kidnapping.
Mary Wyatt says she's taking the recent word that her amateur archaeologist husband, Ron Wyatt, may be released tomorrow seriously.
What we've determined that has been verified by the State Department is that a newspaper in Istanbul received a telex from Bonn, Germany, that stated that the hostages would be released tomorrow.
According to the report, Wyatt and 4 other men will be released at one of 2 places in the province of Mus in eastern Turkey. It's about 120 miles from the province of Bayezid, where the men were searching for Noah's Ark. Mary Wyatt says she has a positive feeling about this latest message of freedom.
It just sounds like the way these people would operate. They would operate through the media.
Ron Wyatt and 4 other Westerners were kidnapped just over a week ago in Turkey by a Kurdish guerrilla group. The men were in Turkey to continue work at this diamond-shaped area atop Mount Ararat, where Noah's Ark is believed to be buried. Mary Wyatt says the past week has been stressful, but she says her faith in God has helped her keep a smile through it all.
I know the Lord has given me the peace that I have, because I really don't have any reason to have that kind of peace other than that it came from him.
Ron Collins, Channel 2 News, Nightside.
And hopes of freedom for a Nashville man kidnapped in Turkey more than a week ago have faded today. Ron Wyatt, an amateur archaeologist, and 5 other men were supposed to be released today by a Kurdish guerrilla group. Wyatt and the others were in Turkey searching for Noah's Ark. A message from the kidnappers released today says Wyatt and the others won't be freed after all. Reached at her Nashville home, Wyatt's wife called the message confusing.
And then it was kind of strange. I believe it was worded, if they are being held captive by members of our group, they of course won't be harmed.
On the 19th day of our captivity, or hostage status, there was a considerable amount of digging taking place down the hill from us and around, shall we say, to the right of the direction we were facing. That, shall we say, they dug quite a deep hole, and I overheard some of their comments, and it was der Mac tourists. We were the tourists, and der Mac means to kill or to permanently stop. So I, at that point, was fearful that they would decide to kill us and to change into their civilian clothes and just kind of filter out through the military encirclement. That, of course, was one of their options. And they had proven that to be a workable option, because some of them had changed into civilian clothes and gone into town and gotten some things and came back. After they finished digging the hole and came back to where we were, the commander of the group and the turjuman, they called her, that simply means translator, came to us and told us what they wanted us to say when we got out. Now, I believe that this, when we got out, thing was just to see how cooperative we were willing to be, and so they could determine what kind of risk to take in moving us, or simply just to kill us and bury us, and then filter out through the military lines themselves. So they came and told us that they wanted us to say that as two of us were too old to travel through these mountains at night, that they had blindfolded us, put us in a car, taken us to a house, and put us under the house, or in a basement or cellar. Two of our number, who shall go nameless at this point in time, had one of those self-righteous attacks, and they were busy puffing themselves up and getting ready to say, "We are not going to lie." Well, I didn't intend to lie either, but having overheard these people talk about killing us and them having this hole dug, I didn't figure it was the time to tell them that I wasn't going to lie. So I nodded and smiled and made very sure I understood what they wanted us to say. I never once said I would say it, and I certainly didn't say that I would not say it. And I interrupted those that were going to say that they would not say it. Now, these are the folks that believed the terrorists were going to release us, and that they had no intention of harming us, and they were not able to understand the Turkish that was being spoken by the diggers of the grave. So I can't totally blame them for their attitude, but I did interrupt their attempts to say they would not tell a lie. And after the commander and the interpreter walked away a little distance, I convinced them that they should save any such comments until a later point in time. Now, the next major event was near the end of the 20 days or 21 days total. There was no news coming over the radio, and this, of course, was not to their liking, so they wanted to kind of shake the tree again and see what else they could get. So they decided to move us, and what they told us was that we would be in a hotel the next day. And of course, this was very pleasant news to the ones that believed that they were being honest with them. That was two of the Americans and the British gentleman. Let's take that back. One of the Americans and the Australian and the British gentleman. There were two of us Americans that didn't necessarily believe this to be the situation. So anyway, we were getting ready that night to leave, and at about 7 o'clock, when we were going to start out to get back to where a car could pick us up and move us, another news bulletin came over the radio, and of course that was the end of our travels. We just stayed right where we were. Now, there's some indication in that they were not willing to actually release us. There got to be more reason to believe that as the next 2 days progressed. When they decided that they were not going to take us, a couple of us talked to the commander, and shall we say, we registered as strong a complaint as you could under those circumstances. In fact, our complaint was to the point that they doubled our guard and warned them to stay away from us, out of reach and that, because they were convinced that we might try to overpower somebody and break free. So the decision was reached that they were going to move us the next night. So the next evening we left from that encampment, and traveled down to an area where we were to meet a car. They referred to it as a taxi. We traveled down to the area, and the car didn't show up that night. Now, I don't know if they had actually planned for it to show up, or if this was just to kind of keep us thinking that we were making some progress. We ended up staying another night up on top of a mountain above the area where the car was to meet us, and the following day it rained. It was a very cold rain. The night we spent on the mountain was very cold, and we had no cover, and Dr. Roberts got some frostbite on his left foot. He had developed some phlebitis in his left leg, and was, shall we say, in real need of getting to a hospital. And we, of course, tried to persuade them to at least let him go out and go to a hospital. Now then, the next night we went down to where the car was supposed to meet us again. We arrived there at the appointed hour, which was 8 p.m. The car was not there. They sent some people out from the encampment before we left to make sure the car didn't come and leave before we would arrive. And so we were forced to sit on the ground or on logs or rocks, and everything was very wet and very cold that night. And we waited there for about 2.5 hours. And finally, I just got up and started walking around, and when they said to sit down, I simply just kept walking and said, choke soak, which means very cold. And finally, when the car hadn't arrived for about 2.5 hours, they decided to take us back up into a gully where the fire couldn't be seen, and build a fire so we could stay warm and maybe make some tea. We had arrived in the gully and were in the process of gathering wood when somebody came up and said that the car had arrived. When we got to the car, they rounded us up and took us a distance from the car and around behind some trees so we could not see the car. A couple of the leaders of the group took the driver off out of earshot, but this time they had decided that somebody in our group knew some Turkish. My belief was that if they had nothing in mind but to take us into town and drop us off near a hotel, that they could have told the driver that in our presence. And if they were just simply checking the oil or something in the vehicle, they could have also done that in our presence. So I was of the opinion that they had something in mind other than taking us to a hotel. I apparently was the only one that felt this way. After about a 30-minute wait, we were put in the car. I was of the opinion, since there would just be one terrorist in the car, that during the trip to wherever he was going to take us, even though the car might be rigged to explode, was probably our best opportunity to escape. Now then, I chose to get in the car directly behind the driver, and nobody objected to that. I had kept a very low and very friendly profile all during the 21 days, and I doubt seriously that anybody expected any trouble from me. So, and also I was one of the older ones, and I was, shall we say, kind of hobbled up. I did sprain my right leg quite severely, but anyway, I took that position. Two of our party rode in the front seat. It was a bucket seat vehicle, a four-wheel drive, not four-wheel drive, but a 4-speed. And with those two people jammed in the front seat, the driver was only able to use the first and the second gears when driving. And, he turned left instead of right and told us he was going to take us to where we could call and get a taxi. I knew then that something was up. This was at 12:30 a.m. In that area that's controlled by Kurdish terrorists at night, nobody stirs. There were no phones in the direction he was going, and had there been a phone, there would be no taxi driver willing to come out there at that hour of the morning and get us. So I knew he was up to something. As we progressed along about 2 blocks, we ran into the military blockade, and this was, shall we say, a nervousing experience, because I was quite sure that they had the car rigged to explode. The man had a hand grenade and a handgun available to him, and had there been a shootout, I doubt seriously that many of us would have survived that. So I didn't take any measures to try to attract the attention of the military, and he drove right through. The windows were steamed up and the car was jammed full, and of course all cars out in southeastern Turkey are jammed full. There's not many cars, and everybody wants to go when somebody goes anywhere. So apparently it didn't look suspicious to the military, and they let us go right through. I asked the man to stop, to dir, and let us out. He named a town on down the road that he wanted to go to. Well, this town was very near the place that we had been abducted to begin with. And I explained to the other folks in the car that this man was not taking us to a phone. There was no phones out there. And I thought that since they didn't respond, one did, said that he believed the man was really going to do that. I didn't anticipate the trouble, or shall we say the reaction I got. Anyway, just down the road a little ways from the military, where we passed through the military, there was a wide area where trucks pulled off during the hours that a restaurant was open across the street. Of course, it wasn't open that time of the morning, but I pinned the driver down from behind him so he couldn't hit anything to blow the car up or do us any damage, and I got the steering wheel of the car and steered it off into this gravel parking area, and then cut the wheel sharply back to the right and spun it out. And I said, "Get out." I was greeted with what sounded like every one of the hostages saying, "You blankety blank fool, are you trying to kill us?" That I had not expected. I told the driver hotel and gradually turned him loose slowly so that I could grab him again if he tried anything dangerous. He simply started the car up and proceeded in the same direction he was going. Now, the only individual I was concerned about was this big gentleman from North Carolina who could have put out my lights long enough till we had been back under a bunch of gun barrels by the time I came, shall we say, got back to reality. So I asked him if he wanted to go home to his wife and children, or if he wanted to keep being a hostage for no telling how long. And he said he wanted to go home, and he said it in a voice that I knew he meant exactly that he did want to go home and that he wouldn't interfere. So I reached between the bucket seats, shoved the car out of second gear into neutral, got the bottom of the steering wheel and turned it to the right, which would have forced him to run into the side of this little culvert bridge type thing we were going across, or to stop. We weren't going fast enough to hurt us if we had hit the side of the bridge. He stopped. I pushed my door open and said, "Get out." Richard opened his door, and the others started their objection. I don't know if it's we don't want to walk from here or what, but Richard terminated that by, in a very harsh, demanding voice, telling them to get out of there. And so they got out, and everybody headed back up the street towards the military group, and the young driver, about a 17-year-old lad, put his hands over his eyes, drew his hand across here, making cutthroat sounds, and then put his hands like this and said, "Lutfin, Lutfin." Now the signal with the eyes and the throat had to do with the threat. If we didn't tell the story about being blindfolded and hid in the basement, they would cut our throat. That was fairly clear. The other was that he didn't want to get arrested, and please don't get him arrested. So at that point, I left the vehicle, and he fired it up and got on down the road at a high rate of speed. And there was no problem in our covering the distance back to where the military, Turkish military were.
A Nashville man is free tonight after being held hostage for nearly 3 weeks in eastern Turkey. Amateur archaeologist Ron Wyatt was one of 5 Westerners reportedly kidnapped while searching for remains of Noah's Ark. The U.S. State Department told Wyatt's family that he was taken by members of the Kurdish Workers' Party, a rebel group fighting for an independent Kurdish state. But tonight, Wyatt contacted his wife, Mary Nell, by phone, and she joins us now live with the latest. What did your husband tell you?
Well, about 40 minutes ago, I received a phone call, and I picked up the phone, and my husband went, "Hi, it's me." And it was exactly the way I had envisioned it happening, and he said, "I'm fine. I really am." And I said, "I knew you were." Then he told me he was in Bengal, the city of Bengal, at the gendarme headquarters, that he couldn't talk. He was headed to Ankara and would be allowed to call me tomorrow.
Is there any indication that he was mistreated in any way?
No, his voice sounded just like same old Ron.
Do you have any idea, Mary Nell, why he was abducted?
Oh, I mean, speculation based on, you know, the German tourists who were taken earlier, that these Kurds are just trying to get attention and embarrass Turkey by showing that they're really in control of that part of the country. I don't pretend to understand all the politics, but I've never really believed he was in any danger, just that these people were trying to make a point.
Who managed to get him released?
I don't know any details at all.
Do you think he's coming back home now? Have his plans changed at all?
I don't know that either. I did receive a phone call from the Australian, some of Dr. Alan Roberts' friends, who was the Australian with them, and they told me he indicated that he would be going to London to get some medical treatment. He had broken his ankle and had some pins in his ankle, and apparently this was giving him problems, and he would be headed there for medical treatment. But other than that, I have received no word whatsoever where my husband may go.
Except for a happy phone call tonight, and we're glad
That's
you
right.
shared the good news with us. Thank you, Mary Nell Wyatt, for joining us live.
Thank you.
A Nashville woman says her husband looks tired and a little thinner, but otherwise in good health after the ordeal he's been through. Mary Nell Wyatt today got to see the first pictures of her husband, Ron, since Kurdish rebels released him from 3 weeks of captivity.
Oh, it's so good to see him.
Ron Wyatt is an amateur archaeologist who was kidnapped in eastern Turkey along with 4 other Westerners.
They were constantly traveling by foot, but they were moving them around all night long, and then the only time they could sleep was during the day, and they said it was so cold that, and they didn't have warm clothing.
Mrs. Wyatt expects her husband home early next week.
Now, we simply were debriefed. After that, we were treated quite nicely. The clothes that we had worn all that time were thrown away by the Turkish military. We were able to get some shoes, get some medical treatment. We signed warrants for the arrest and imprisonment of our captors. Then we were flown out by helicopter from there to Batman, Turkey. There, the Black Hawk Squadron. It was a helicopter battle group. Were on maneuvers, and as we went back out over the area, we were able to film a bit of that. Now, you'll notice in the video taken on the helicopter that my eyes were busy looking down on both sides of the helicopter, and I was acting quite nervous. The reason for this is that I knew those terrorists had at least 4 upgraded Browning automatic rifles that were quite capable of bringing down a helicopter. And so the news, I was sure, had already got to them that we had not told what they wanted us to tell. And I thought the probabilities of them trying to blow this American helicopter out of the air was very real. And what I didn't know was that there was a very large twin-propped helicopter bristling with armament that was shadowing us from where I was sitting. I couldn't see this. So I was, shall we say, not a happy camper until we got to the Black Hawk landing base at Batman. From there, we were flown into Incirlik Air Force Base. These people treated us very, very nicely. Everybody, the Australian, the Briton, and ourselves. And shall we say, we were given some psychological information so that we wouldn't think we were crazy when we had bad dreams about being back out in the area and having flashbacks and that sort of thing. So anyway, that's the story. I appreciate you taking time to listen. I would like to add this. There's over 5 billion people on planet Earth. I believe that the Lord is soon to come. I believe that the judgment of the living is not too far in the future. And I believe that the tables of stone, at least, if not the Ark of the Covenant, will be brought out. And the fact that Christ died and his blood was shed on the mercy seat will be presented to the world. I also believe that before that happens, we are obliged to get the rest of the things that we're working on, Noah's Ark, the Red Sea crossing site, the real Mount Sinai, and all of these things on video and in books, so that people will be able to access them. When the Ark of the Covenant comes out, it will be a news item. And the other things will get a tremendous amount of coverage, but news people do not give the significance of, or the religious significance of what this all means. That will be up to us. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your prayers while we were out there as hostages. If there's one thing that I can say at this point in time more convincingly than before, it is that God's angels indeed look after his people, or those that are trying to help him, help in his work. Thank you. It will be a news item, and the other things will get a tremendous amount of coverage, but news people do not give the significance of, or the religious significance of what this all means. That will be up to us. And so what we're trying to do is get the computer equipment to simulate things that happened during the flood, the Red Sea crossing site, and all of this, to answer the many questions that I get after showing these, so that the films can be shown in churches by people other than myself, and the questions that folks would normally ask will be answered in the presentation themselves. Now, you folks, many of you have been very helpful. You've gone help me dig, and you've put money into this. And I am not one to beg, and so I'm not going to hear. God owns the entire universe. He's not hard of hearing, and he does not have a cash flow problem. However, when you look at the overall scheme of things, the greatest honor and privilege that a human being could have on this earth is to have had a hand in doing God's work. This is how I consider what I have been able to do. I don't feel I'm anything special except that Christ died for me. He died for you, and he died for all those other 5 billion people. And so that makes us special, but other than that, we're all equal before God. Many of us have been blessed more than others, and I believe that we will be much happier at the end of everything if we have been as generous with God as he has with us. If you have any suggestions, ideas on how to present this more effectively, I would be most glad to hear from you. If you want to help in some of these projects by helping us do some excavating on Noah's Ark next summer, I do ask this, that you be willing to follow instructions carefully. This is a very important excavation, as is the Ark of the Covenant excavation, and we cannot and will not tolerate people that destroy things that we run across on our way into these sites, as well as once we get in there. Our relationship with these governments is such that if we start just digging through things that they consider important without documenting them as archaeologists are supposed to, we will lose our digging permits. And folks, we cannot tolerate anybody that is unwilling to follow instructions. Now, I am very willing to listen to helpful hints, as those of you that have worked with me are aware. But again, we welcome your help, and God welcomes your help, I'm sure. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your prayers while we were out there as hostages. If there's one thing that I can say at this point in time more convincingly than before, it is that God's angels indeed look after his people, or those that are trying to help him in his work. Thank you.
PR, as he awaits word from the Soviets on whether they will match his disarmament plans.
And is this the final resting place of Noah's Ark? One explorer believes it is, and he'll explain why in today's call-in segment.
This is CNN Morning News with Donna Kelly and Bob Kane, bringing...
An amateur explorer trying to unravel an ancient mystery found trouble, if not his prize. Ronald Wyatt and 4 colleagues ventured into eastern Turkey in search of Noah's Ark, but they were abducted by Kurdish rebels and held for 3 weeks. They were finally released, and Wyatt returned home to Dallas last week. Wyatt says he found the final resting place of the famed Ark, and he joins us today to tell us about his quest. Mr. Wyatt, welcome to you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Donna.
Let's talk about when you were taken first. What happened?
Well, we had planned to go to a town down in southeast Turkey, and we had planned to get there before dark. I've been out there about 32 times, and you do not travel after dark. There's road repairs, and we ended up getting caught in this roadblock by these terrorists.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Kurdish rebels took you. Did they tell you why they took you, and you were taken for about 3 weeks?
Well, basically, they said nobody listened to them unless they had hostages. So that was their expressed reason for doing it.
And then why did they say they let you go?
Well, the news dropped off. They had these shortwave radios, and as long as they and we were in the news, they were quite happy to hang on to us. Once that quit, then I guess they knew that to release us would get them back in the news again.
How concerned were you for your life?
The terrain itself was, it's called the Black Hill by the Turkish military, and that's a very apt description. You could get killed or maimed very easily just walking through there, running through this area, which we were forced to do night after night.
And who found you? And I was reading in some notes that you kind of left a trail, didn't you?
Yes, I put some money in my pocket and I dropped $495 at intervals along the way, and this did lead the military to this Black Hill area. And these Turkish police officers returned the money after we were out.
Let's go on to the Ark. What makes you think that this is Noah's Ark?
Well, we have the word of a photogrammetry expert that this large object is a boat. And also its location on a mountainside at 6,300 feet fits in with the fact that there's only enough water on the planet to increase the sea level to 7,000 feet above present sea level if ice caps and everything were melted down. Also, there's, shall we say, boxcar loads of timbers out there. Donna, I have one right here in front of me.
Okay, let's take a look and let's talk about that to continue our chat here. Tell us what that is.
Well, this is a piece of deck board. We used a subsurface interface radar system to look down through the boat. We were not allowed to do an extensive excavation, which is first choice in archaeology once you feel you've identified something. But anyway, we found tremendous amounts of these timbers, and the Turkish authorities had their people dig this up and allowed me to bring it home to have it analyzed. And it is indeed petrified wood. In particular, it's Peki cypress.
Okay, so that's petrified wood. Now,
Yes.
How are you going to go about dating that, and what kind of analyzation are you going to use to see if that is the Ark?
Well, what archaeologists are required to supply in order to identify a site, Donna, is physical remains. And then if you're fortunate enough to have inscriptions, this is a real plus. And then, of course, a local tradition. And there's tremendous amounts of physical remains, and there are a great number of inscriptions. And, of course, this whole story of the Ark landing on Ararat, the location of this boat is 12 miles south of the big mountain. And, of course, there's a long-time local tradition that the Ark landed in that area.
You know, well-known biblical story. Did you find some animal remains as they were supposed to be on there 2 by 2?
We did. There's a large amount of what's called corpalites by geologists and archaeologists. These are animal droppings that have fossilized. We also found a fossilized antler. Now, the possibility has been brought up that this might be a barn or some other type structure. Antlers are associated with non-domesticated animals. And, of course, this tells us that at least one undomesticated animal was on this boat at some point in time. And the corpalites that are on there, of course, we can identify the animal by the shape and whatnot of the droppings. Now, we also found something, and I guess if I have a favorite object, it's this. This is a rivet, and it's quite a sophisticated riveting system. It's a washer about approximately 3.5 inches in diameter with a shaft that's a little over 1 inch in diameter, and it's been struck while it's hot, and this splays the end of the shaft out so it cannot slip back through this washer. Now, there are thousands of these on there. These are found in the radar scans.
I need to go on for just a moment.
Sure.
I guess I don't need to tell you, of course, that you do have some critics. We had a story last Friday, and also a scientist at Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico who analyzed the artifact says that there's no way that they are pieces of the Ark. And one of the critics in a report that we had on Friday says that he doesn't think that it's anything more than a rock formation, and that perhaps you've been watching too many Indiana Jones movies.
Well, I do like Indiana Jones movies. Now, the gentleman, since you didn't mention his name, I we'll just say that perhaps he didn't want his name mentioned. But we have, shall we say, hours of footage of this individual saying this is indeed Noah's Ark. Now, I have a little problem with somebody that says, yes, there's even intervaled metal readings on there. He actually himself found a right-angled iron bracket, and we have him on video identifying this as a right-angled iron bracket. And he took it to Los Alamos National Laboratories and had it analyzed, and we have the results of that. It was 91% pure ferric oxide. So,
all right.
I don't have any problem with critics. Everybody's entitled to an opinion, but I hate to see them doing a 180.
All right, we need to take a break here, but we will come back. And if you'd like to ask Explorer Ronald Wyatt a question about Noah's Ark, you can give us a call, 404-221-0218. We are back with Ronald Wyatt. He is an explorer who claims to have found Noah's Ark, and we are ready for your calls. And Georgia, you're on the air first.
Hi.
Hi, Georgia.
I was wondering, after such an incredible ordeal, are you going to make any plans to go back in the near future?
Yes, ma'am. We have promises from the Turkish government that they will issue us the permit that we wanted. The only thing that's happened is since we wasted 21 days out in the woods out there in eastern Turkey, we're going to have to postpone what we were going to do until next summer.
Okay, Connecticut, you're on the air.
Hi. About 4 or 5 years ago, there was a documentary done also on the finding of a piece of wood from Noah's Ark on Mount Ararat, and it was carbon dated and said to have been authentic. Is this, what you have found, an extension of that since it had been lost and never found again?
No, ma'am. This is totally different. The piece of wood you're referring to is a piece found by Ferdinand Navarra back in 1957. The place where he said it was carbon dating was checked with, and he had not had carbon dating. It appears from Turkish records in particular that in 1955 he and some people actually took this piece of wood up and put it in the ice crevasse. And the reason I say this on the air is we have affidavits to that effect. And so no, this is not. And an actual test done by the late Jim Irwin, the astronaut on Apollo 15, showed that particular piece of wood not to exceed 700 years in age.
All right, we need to take a break here, but we'll come back with many more of your phone calls right after this. You stay with us.
This is CNN.
Deborah, thank you. And we are back with Ronald Wyatt. He is an Ark explorer. And Texas, you're on the air.
Hello. Mr. Wyatt, could you tell me something about the inscription?
Yes, there's quite a number and variety of inscriptions. Most of them are of the nature of petroglyphs. As you know, these are chiseled in stone. And we have inscriptions of 8 people leaving a boat that's, shall we say, on top of a wave and covered by a rainbow, or shall we say there's a rainbow over these. This is in several locations out there. We also have petroglyphs of some of the animals that were on the boat, specifically of a giraffe. I'm unaware that anybody has seen a giraffe in eastern Turkey in historical times. So these are some of the inscriptions I have, not with me, well, in the studio, but not up here. There's an inscription of 8 people in a boat, and as you may or may not be aware, the importance of the individual to the group is indicated by their size. And so we have a father person, a mother person, and 3 sons and 3 daughters or daughter-in-laws in this boat. And there's two ravens in this picture, one over a mountain some distance from the boat and one over the actual boat. And as you can appreciate, we can't give the exact locations of these because we have had people steal some of these inscriptions.
And weren't the ravens sent out after the 40 days and 40 nights to check and see if it was still raining?
That's approximately right, Donna. It was after 150 days.
Okay.
Not of storm, but after they'd been in the boat that long.
Okay, Georgia, you're on the air. Good morning.
Good morning. I was just wondering how the size of the structure compared with the dimensions in the Bible.
Okay, Moses was educated in Egypt. We're told that in the New Testament and also in the Old Testament. And the Royal Egyptian cubit, which he was familiar with and we believe used in the giving the dimensions of the ark, is 20.6 inches, and 300 of those is exactly 515 feet, and that is the length dimension of the boat. The boat has splayed some, and this is to be expected in an aging boat. So the width is a little greater than that specified in the Bible, but you figure the degree of splaying and you come up with very close measurements, very similar to those in the Bible.
New York, hello.
Yes, I've been studying archaeology and ancient history for a long time, and Old Persian, and I'm Jewish, and I was educated in the Old Testament, and I think it's important for people to realize that archaeologists and geologists have been in the Middle East for well over 100 years using modern methods. Many of them are dedicated Christians and Jews and Muslims, all of whom believe in the Old Testament. And the reason why none of them think that Noah's Ark could be on Mount Ararat is because from what we know of modern science, it would take Mount Ararat being, 13,000, 14,000 feet, it would take such a huge flood to place an ark there that the flood would leave signs all over, virtually all over the Middle East, and there are no signs whatsoever of such a huge flood. There are small local floods in, Sumer and Eridu and Kish and places like that, but virtually no signs, no geological signs of a flood.
Mr. Wyatt?
Okay, I appreciate your observation there, sir. Now, we will have to agree with you on the fact that this boat could not be on Ararat for many reasons. It's a post-flood volcano. There's glaciers with the associated glacier flow, and the Bible specifies that the ark landed in mountains, plural, of Urartu, and that was quite a large empire out there. And so it is not on Mount Ararat. It's 12 miles to the south on a place called Mount Masr, or Mountain of Pain, or something to that extent. Now, as to your worldwide evidences of a flood, I will disagree with you there, sir. There is evidence of worldwide flood because of marine fossils at the Cretaceous level. Everything, and that's a roughly average of 7,000 feet around the globe, and everything above that is obviously upthrusted material. And so when you say that these people all agree, I have to agree that the predominance of people in this type of research say this, but sadly they are quoting the textbooks that they studied in school, and they have not done field archaeology on this, or they would not say that.
Ark Explorer Ronald Wyatt, thanks very much for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Donna.
In tomorrow's call-in segment, we'll talk with a former CIA official about the